Hello, this is Brian.
And this is Stephanie.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of a codependent mind.
We decided to switch it up a little bit and have Brian go first because we literally record that every time.
Right. We could just replay it.
But we don't. So now you know. It's live. We're going to go back to a topic that we touched on in season 5?
Yeah, the very end of season 5.
It was the Money Talks episode where we talked about financial codependency. But money is a pretty big topic in all of our lives. So we thought we'd give it another treatment in the context of this season, which is focused on relationships.
And tools.
So what is money as a tool? What does that look like? How does it function? How does it dysfunction?
Just to recap a little bit of what we talked about in that previous episode, financial codependency, we kind of went into the various ways in which I used money similar to how I used the rest of my codependent behaviors, which was to try to regulate other people's emotions. I had this overwhelming feeling that I had to accommodate, to people please, to caretake. And as we've said before, we use our strengths. And one of the strengths I had was I had financial resources. So I used that.
Although you didn't really have sufficient financial resources.
No, because I tapped them out with my financial codependency.
That's right. So money was absolutely a tool in those relationships, just like lying, but it was destructive to your health and well-being.
I mean, like the lying, the finances were a tool for me. It gave me, because I felt very powerless across the board in every situation, and money gave me a little sense of control. Like we talked about in that episode, how I did a spreadsheet budget and I paid all the bills, and so I felt as though I had something to offer.
And you spent. But the spending was primarily directed on things that they wanted.
Yes. So either it was coming directly from them, or it was coming from me disguised. It was coming from me as I am still, my motivation is to caretake. It's not, they weren't things that I necessarily would have thought to spend money on if I were on my own.
And as narcissists, they were narcissistic spenders. I guess there are narcissistic savers too. I don't know.
Probably.
But they both also used money to feel a different way about themselves and their lives.
Right. So yeah, I mean, and that's a really common thing, to use money to regulate our emotions. And when you put two people together that aren't good at regulating their emotions, and one of them being an entitled person and one of them being codependent, then that works out kind of nicely for the narcissist anyway. So with those relationships we've talked about before, R was very much into this, wanted a unique life, wanted to stand out. It was about appearances.
The stereotypical narcissist. Expensive cars, expensive clothes.
Nice house.
Expensive living situation.
Yeah. And the trips were, of course, if there was no Facebook, then the trips might not have been as necessary, right? Because it was just like, look what I'm doing. I'm relaxing on the beach, that kind of stuff. Jay was more covert when it came to that kind of spending, but ultimately it was pretty much the same. It was for the same reasons. With her, well, there was very much trips, festivals, things like that. This kind of I deserve this kind of attitude. But then also this dependency where she had these supposed medical problems to where that actually wound up costing a lot of money, which I just completely excused and rationalized, starting with just not working because she's too tired. So I'm just going to quit my job. But then hundreds of dollars a month on supplements and acupuncture and massage and things like that. That didn't seem to actually have any effect. But for me, it was just like, well, I got to do this because she actually literally told me that I'm going to abuse you if you don't do these things for me. Right. More or less, not using that word, obviously.
So there was the financial codependency in that, again, you were using any financial resources you had to try to emotionally regulate your partner and spending money on what they valued and they thought they needed rather than what you valued. But you also had some financial disorder yourself in that you didn't really have a healthy relationship to money independent of that.
No. Yeah, I was already unhealthy with money and I was all the way through. So even though I was using my finances during those relationships, probably primarily to regulate the other person's emotion, I was dependent on it also. I used it to feel better about my situation, about myself, about shame, about being anxious. I mean, on a daily basis, money entered the picture somehow. It was constantly on my mind.
So what were some examples of that when it wasn't so much about you spending money to emotionally regulate them, but you spending money to emotionally regulate yourself?
Well, one would be like going out to eat. Like say with Jay, I cooked all week and I rationalized my way into thinking that that meant I should go out to eat all weekend, every meal. A, it was expensive, and B, it wasn't actually a pleasant experience, but I found things to think of as pleasant experiences from it. So like say I wasn't really allowed to drink any alcohol at home. So, I could have a beer if I went to a restaurant, and just the whole atmosphere, I'll go to a new place and just kind of forget about the big picture of it, like who I'm with, but it's just the act of going out.
So this was a distraction from what your life was actually like. Like you couldn't sit in your house all weekend with this person that you kind of didn't really like and not be able to drink and not have any pleasure. So it was to access pleasure that you didn't have. Right.
I also bought a much larger than needed house near the beginning of the relationship with Jay, pretty much completely on my own will. As far as I can remember and tell, she wasn't pushing for a large house like ours was, but for whatever reason, I felt like that's what was appropriate. And then there were certain lifestyle things that I wanted to go with that. Like I wanted to be the type of person that had people over and had events and, pool parties and things like that.
Even though you didn't really have a circle of friends that would warrant that, or a relationship in which you could invite people to your
right. I mean, none of that. Right. I mean, so I had this. My circle of friends was all this just from things that I was doing on my own over the course of the previous couple of years, and it was very like outer circle sort of people where I didn't really know them, and they were mostly Facebook friends, if anything. And then, my relationship with Jay was not something that I felt good about. So showcasing it at an event was not something that actually felt very good when it actually came down to doing it.
So similar to, again, the narcissists, you were using money for identity formation to make yourself believe, and maybe others believe, that you had a certain kind of life, that you had a certain kind of relationship, that you were a certain kind of person. You were using it to distract yourself in both relationships from the resentment you felt, from the shame you felt, from the disconnection, and sometimes despair that you felt in those relationships. So we wanted to talk about, again, money as a tool. So you were using money as a tool in the relationships, but also in your own life. And I think it's worthwhile to explore. That's why we're having this episode, kind of what kind of tool money is. Like we've talked about with all the tools themselves are somewhat neutral. It's how you use them. Do they have destructive effects and productive effects? And interestingly, we're such a money-saturated culture.
It's true.
It feels like people always assume like money is good, like more money, you inject money into the situation. But money actually isn't very good at doing what you were asking it to do.
Yeah. I mean, I was mostly using it to regulate my emotions and regulate other people's emotions, which is, it's not good at that at all.
Well, it's also not good at changing the way you feel about yourself, your life, and your relationships. It does not provide effective, lasting change on how you feel about yourself or how you feel about your life. And so in that way, it's very similar to other things that people try to use for those purposes.
Right. Yeah. Things like alcohol, drugs, food, sex, things like that. Yeah. Right. I mean, it may seem like it works in the moment. And
Absolutely.
So there's a motivation like, I know this has worked before. This helps with this, but not overall.
So why is that? So money is a tool, and tools solve problems. That's what they're designed to do. So I think it's useful to think of ourselves as fundamentally problem-solving organisms. So this is kind of what evolution is about. Every living organism needs to solve the problem of being alive. Mm-hmm. Being alive creates a whole host of problems, the main one being, how do I stay alive?
Yeah, right.
From a single-cell organism all the way up to us, that's what's happening. Solving the problems in the environment in order to stay alive and reproduce. And again, evolution rewards the organisms that solve the problems in their environments the best. And for most of evolution, most of the organisms solve the problems by being a certain type of organism.
Right. It's just self-contained.
So they didn't kind of actively solve problems. Consciously tried to. Obviously, there was no consciousness. Whatever body they existed in solved the problems of the environment the best. That could have been they had a bigger body, or they had a smaller body, or they had a body that processed oxygen well, or they had a body that defended itself well. So the bodies contained the solution to the problems of their environment. And then so they persisted and reproduced. So we came along with some other organisms as well. There's some evidence that other mammals use tools. There's the whole octopus thing, I guess octopi are these incredible problem solvers. But we more actively solved problems, and we adopted tools to solve particular problems. Money is one of those tools. And the thing about tools is that they work the best when you use them to solve the problems they were designed to solve.
So with money being...
So I would say money was designed to access goods and services that an individual cannot provide for themselves. So we existed for hundreds of thousands of years without money. We found other ways to solve the problems of being alive.
Yeah, small tribes, small villages.
That was the way that we lived. I think people kind of often step back to register that. The way that we're living now is so different from the way that our bodies existed for hundreds of thousands of years. But then it's not that I know this history particularly well, but I'm imagining that the societies got more complex. Mm-hmm. They got larger. And so problems like feeding ourselves and housing ourselves, for instance, which used to be solved by the community, was now needed in a different way to be solved. And so money or currency came into existence. But the thing about money is that it can quickly become, as it was for you, and I think of many people, a form of dependency. Well, it is actually for all of us at this point.
That's true. All of us are dependent on it in some way, like it or not, even if we're conscious of it.
But the more you can do for yourself, the less you're going to depend on money. So at this point, again, very few of us can say feed ourselves or house ourselves without relying on money.
If we're even allowed to, a lot of times.
That's one reason. I'm not saying it's even anything inherent to us. It's just the way our economic system is created, or our communal life is structured around money and forcing us to spend money. But if you feel powerless in your life, then the things that you can't do for yourself are going to be a lot of things.
Because basic needs, like you're saying, our society has reached a point where pretty much everyone's dependent on money for certain things, for these basic needs. Mm-hmm. But then, yeah, like you're saying, if someone feels powerless and they don't know how to regulate their emotions, then their needs, with quotes around it, is everything they encounter throughout their day.
Everything they need from their life, they feel somewhat powerless to get it from their own capability or competency or agency.
Right. Not self-sufficient.
So money comes into play. So let's talk a little bit about needs. I think we've mentioned before, I don't remember what episode, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Probably a lot of people have heard about that. Just this idea that we have a lot of needs as human beings, which is a similar way to say is there's a lot of problems that we have as human beings that we need to solve. There's the basic ones, which Maslow puts at the bottom of the pyramid. These physiological, we need food, we need water, we need shelter, we need rest. And then he would put as the higher level needs. So you have to have those needs met before you can kind of do much else. Those are the problems that are immediate. You need to immediately solve those problems. But then we have safety needs, a need for security, a need for stability, resource security, that we feel that we have the resources, financial or otherwise, that we need in order, for instance, to satisfy those physiological needs. And then it kind of moves up into, we have this collection of needs that are categorized under love and belonging. We have a need for intimacy, for acceptance, for friendship, for emotional relationships, and for affection. And then as it moves up again, we have esteem needs for respect, for recognition, for status. And then at the top of his pyramid, he has the self-actualization, which is kind of a need for meaning, for reaching one's full potential, kind of a sense of purpose in your life.
Right. So what we were just saying is that money does pretty much what it was designed for. Was the physiological needs, the basic needs, mostly. Maybe a little bit of the safety, the second level. But yeah, I was trying to use it for all of these, all the way across, like using it to try to maintain my relationships, using it to build my self-image and my self-esteem, to feel better about myself, to have an identity, using it for everything on this pyramid.
And the higher in the pyramid the need is, the lower the return on investment you're going to get from throwing money at it. So it does a pretty good job at this point. Still problematic, but it does a pretty good job in terms of food, shelter, clothing, and as you said, somewhat security, but does a pretty piss poor job at the needs that come under love and belonging and esteem and self-actualization. The problem being, though, like we mentioned earlier, it can do a good job for a very short period of time.
Right. Very short period of time.
Which you saw all the time with both R and J. But let's talk about R because, again, it's more stereotypical, right? Mm-hmm. So you'd buy her a BMW and she'd be happy for a while. And she'd feel good about her life. Or you'd rent a new apartment in some fancy place in California. And for a while, it's like, oh, this is great. We're living the life. But then?
It was extremely short-lived. Yeah. I mean, it was usually no more than a month. And before there was something else that needed to be satisfied under the same umbrella. And as unconscious as I was pretty conscious of that at the time, that it didn't work, and now, and there was no way I was ever going to get out of debt. And because this cycle that didn't seem to be any way out of it.
But it was the same with Jay as well. Like these kind of quote unquote medical treatments would work for a while and they wouldn't work because she didn't feel any better.
Right. Yeah.
But you still have to keep paying for those, and then you just add new ones on. Like, so it's this constant adding on as well.
Right. Yeah. And with the supplements, that's kind of a tough, because these aren't really tested. So it's just someone says, this works on this. And you're just like, okay.
You can test them on yourself. But if they were working, then she wouldn't need any more. But it was always more, right? It's always more. You're going to always need more because it doesn't actually, none of the money and the things that money can buy does not actually help you feel good about yourself and help you feel connected to the people around you and help you feel self-respect long term. It just doesn't. In fact, it often has the opposite effect and intensifies some level of shame.
Which for me, I mean, as far as the spending money on my end goes, like say I came up with the idea for a trip or something like that, really the benefits were depleted before I even got to the trip itself. It was the distraction of planning the trip, the thought of the trip, of where I'd be going and things like that. And I'm still not thinking of that big picture at all. I'm not thinking about the previous trip and how awful that was. I'm not thinking about who I'm going with, what it's going to be like, what, the days are going to be like and things like that. I'm just thinking, that sounds like a fun place. What kind of restaurants do they have? And then I just spend hours planning that. And so the money's satisfying me in a way that it's a distraction and it's making me excited that I'm going to be doing something. But then the trip comes along and oops, it's terrible.
Or it's not great.
Yeah.
It's not a good use of money.
No, it's not a good use of money, but right. Yeah.
And then you go back and you look at your credit card bill.
Yep. Yeah.
And then there's shame.
There's shame during the trip too, because I'm spending all throughout the trip going like, oh geez, okay, another $100 meal. And
so again, money is a tool to access goods and services that you cannot provide for yourself. And if you have no sense of self and poor emotional regulation, what you cannot provide for yourself is a lot. It goes way beyond addressing your basic needs. So if you can't soothe your anxiety, if you can't feel good about yourself, if you don't know who you are and what you value, if you don't feel connected to the people around you, you have all of these needs that you cannot provide for yourself. And some people, you included, will turn to money to try to meet those needs.
And then add in codependency and someone else's needs, and it doubles.
That's a lot of money. So the problem about being dependent on money, the problem about being in relationships that are kind of money dependent, as both of your relationships were. Two problems. It's a finite resource. It's an extremely finite resource.
Right. Yeah. As we especially saw in our relationship where I was paycheck to paycheck with mass stock credit cards the entire time. Very stressful.
It's very stressful. So love is not a finite resource. So if that's a tool you're using, you're much better luck.
Yeah, right.
Money is a finite resource. This is one of the most finite resources, actually. And then two is that, as we were just talking about, it's kind of pretty bad at doing anything other than exchanging it for basic needs and services.
Right. Anything beyond that is just diminishing returns very quickly.
Yeah, right. So what role can it play in relationships? And one thing to remember when you think through that in your own life or in your relationships is that, again, we existed for hundreds of thousands of years without money. Pretty well. Money is a tool to access resources. But before there was money, relationships were the resource. They were the ways in which all of these problems of being alive were solved.
Yeah, because think about what you just said. Money is there to provide things like food or shelter, things that you can't provide for yourself. That's what relationships can do, because we each have, So you're in this little community, or even just a relationship with one person. One person is going to know how to do a certain thing. Someone else is going to know how to do something else. And then you get together and there you go.
Well, and if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or if you just think about, again, the problems that human beings have in terms of being alive, there's overlap there, right? But let's use Maslow's paradigm. The need for food, for shelter, for rest. Those were all addressed by a community. You existed in a community, a family and a community in which those needs were taken care of. As a child, those needs were taken care of. And then as you grow an adult participant, you all helped each other meet those needs. Safety, same thing. You all helped each other meet needs for safety, for love and belonging. You all helped each other.
It's baked in.
It was baked in. Friendship and intimacy and acceptance. You were part of a group, of a tribe. Esteem, self-actualization, the relationships and the web of relationships you existed in helped you be the best version of yourself because you were making a contribution to your family, your community, your tribe. And your contribution was probably based on what you brought to the table. I'm not saying this is an idyllic life, but the way that we have been successful in forming and maintaining relationships has absolutely paid off in the evolutionary race for survival. Human beings are here. I mean, we're not the biggest animals. We're not the strongest animals. We're not the most powerful animals. We're not we can't, we don't like have skins that change color to protect us. I mean, we're fairly vulnerable, but the power of our relationships is almost unparalleled across the tree of life. That's the resource that we should be focused on. So not get more money and then you get more relationships.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is you get more relationships and then you need money less. Tremendous. You need far less financial resources if you are well resourced in terms of relationships.
Yeah. So when I think about this, what you were just saying with the village, when I have that in mind, when I think about our relationship and what our relationship can do for each of us, that helps a lot to imagine that, to imagine, oh, yes, the tools are just right here. The tools are the way we connect. The tools are how we help each other. This interdependence that we have with each other.
So there's actually kind of a monetary value on a healthy relationship above and beyond. I mean, we know that the cultures and communities, say that you and I live in, also put a monetary value on mostly heterosexual relationships. Man, woman, have children, right? In terms of that there's so many financial incentives to be in a relationship, and then even more so to be in a relationship that's validated by the state of marriage. So obviously those are clear, I think, to most people, the kind of low-hanging fruit. Yeah, if you're in a relationship, then you can share a house and you can split the cost. And I mean, there's just economies of scale for living as two rather than living as one. But there's also value that's a little bit more hidden. And that's the value that we were just talking about, that value of feeling that many of your needs are being met by your relationships. So you do not need to, say, spend money in order to meet them.
Yeah, one example that comes to mind of a way that my relationship to money and how it serves the relationship changed between my relationship with Jay versus my relationship with you, using something that I bought during the relationship with Jay, a trailer. And I thought this was going to somehow serve the relationship. It was going to solve some kind of problem. Like I've still yet to figure out exactly what problem I thought it was supposed to solve. But
it must not even just be the relationship. It must also been, because I don't think Jay was clamoring for a trailer,
no.
Right? So it was also some identity for you.
Right. So I had all kinds of, the whole thing was just one giant rationalization. So it's really hard to get to the truth sometimes when I know that 100% of my thinking was rationalization. But so, yeah, I was solving my own, I had a trailer before and I had a certain lifestyle I wanted to go with that trailer. And then Jay and I were going on trips that were kind of expensive. So I was like, well, maybe these trailer trips will satisfy that. And we, go on less expensive trips with the trailer and just be out in nature. But then as soon as I got on these trips, oh, wait, yes, taking trips with Jay is awful. And then I still felt compelled to do the things I did when I was at home, which is go out to eat. And
from a trailer, you were going
from the trailer now. So I spent
leave a trailer
all
in the
this
woods.
money on this trailer, and then I go out there and it's like, well, this isn't fun. I still felt the need to go out to eat, still felt the need to go into town, the nearest town, and sightsee and spend money on things. And so it solved nothing.
And again, so you buy this trailer to solve some problem or to satisfy some need you imagine you have. And then you go out on a trip and doesn't actually solve that problem or address that need. And what you do, you don't reevaluate the decision. You spend more money.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So now you're spending money to address the problems that money created.
Yeah. Spending quite a bit more.
And this is, again, the problem about using money as a tool to address emotional needs that it can't meet, or it meets very briefly. And then the need comes up. Now you need to spend more money. I mean, so it's very much like an addiction. So you drink, you feel a little bit better, but then you feel quite a bit worse. But now you have to drink more to get the same effect that you first time. And it can be very similar with money.
Yeah. So luckily for us, I still own this trailer, and our relationship was quite a bit different. Even right near the beginning, we just enjoyed being together. And the whole idea of trailer was perfect for us. We took this thing out. We didn't go anywhere. We just relaxed in the trailer, in the campsite, had campfires, great conversations.
I would never even thought, like, why are we going to leave this great trailer? We're sitting by the woods, as you said, by a campfire, having a great conversation. Why would we go out to dinner? Like, why would we go spend money somewhere?
Exactly.
Not even, no need, no desire to.
Exactly. Right. We didn't use the car at all the entire time. Because it's just like, yeah, where are we going to go? We got everything right here.
Well, and similarly, you mentioned that you would eat out, which is true, right? You would eat out pretty much every weekend with Jay? All weekend.
All weekend, right.
I mean, eating out is something that we enjoy doing occasionally, but we certainly don't feel the need to do it. And often we'll do the calculation that it actually even sounds more fun staying in and not spending money.
Right. Money may be part of that equation, but sometimes it's not even, because it's just so enjoyable, our evenings when we're at home and the things we do.
Eating out is not as it was. I mean, in one way it was for you to access pleasure that you just did not have a pleasurable life.
Right.
So, yeah, you get to go out, have a meal that someone else cooks. You're allowed by Jay to have a drink when you were not allowed, quote unquote, to have a drink at home. But again, fleeting pleasure doesn't actually solve the larger problems of not having pleasure in your life. You can't buy, if you don't have a pleasurable life, you can't buy it. You're not going to have enough money to buy it. You can buy moments of it, but then that becomes a dependency. So we don't have that. Like, we have a secure, comfortable, pleasurable life just here in our house. And so if we go out to dinner, it needs to be worth extra money. It needs to really add some value to that.
Yeah, I like when we sometimes we'll say, like, oh, this is a $15 cocktail. Is this going to be $15 good?
Right. So back to the trailer, your first trailer example. And I don't know that if we would have bought a trailer, frankly. So I'm very happy that you kind of made this ridiculous purchase and brought it to the relationship, because it's a little hard to make trailers pay off in terms of.
Yeah, it's not the most responsible thing. You have to take it out a lot for it to be worth it, and you still have to pay for the campsite. And
yeah,
it's.
But for me, it was like, great, this guy's a trailer.
Right. Got that part of the equation out of the way. At least.
But. So when you had the trailer with Jay, which you purchased because you thought it was going to solve some problem or meet some needs that you had, and then it didn't, so then you're still spending money on the trips. It's this whole money as a tool. It makes me think of that saying that people have, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. Yeah.
And you were trying to use money for all of these things that, again, it wasn't designed to do, and it was doing a bad job. That being said, like, we're not against spending money. We spend money, and it can be difficult to do these equations for sure. Is this worth it? One, because we're notoriously bad at knowing what makes us happy. There's a kind of classic example of commuting to work, where people will think what's going to make them happy is this large house, but in order to buy a large house, it has to be that they can afford. It has to be quite far away from their work. And then that one factor in people's happiness or contentment with their life is the length of their commute. Like, there's a definite correlation between how happy and satisfied you are and how long you commute to work. So spending all this money on this very expensive house, that probably is forcing you to do something that's going to actually make you unhappier.
Right. It kind of cancels each other out.
It's very difficult to spend money wisely. Maybe that's because in terms of human history, it's a very recent invention. And so we really haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, right. And then it can get even more difficult when you're talking about two people now with their own separate needs and wants and desires.
Right. So we talked about the way that we think about the relationship as having three entities, the me, the you, the us. All of those entities can be thought of having those Maslow hierarchy of needs, but even just focusing on the basic ones, which is we want to kind of try to contain money at the more basic levels as possible. So you are going to have physiological needs and needs for safety, and I'm going to have physiological needs and needs for safety, and then the relationship itself is going to have those needs. The nice thing being, again, if it's a healthy, secure relationship, it should be helping meet those needs with less money. So when we're talking about money as a tool in relationships, we're actually advocating for find ways to make it less necessary as a tool. Find ways to keep money in the toolbox. And not because, again, we're against spending money. Like, not saying become a hoarder or an excessive saver, because there's certainly that out there as well. People who save excessively, who have huge bank accounts compared to what their basic needs are, that's also a disordered relationship to money.
Right, because it's based in anxiety. It's based in trying to soothe your emotions.
You regulate your emotions, but you're doing it by saving rather than spending. The ideal is do not use money to meet your emotional needs or any of these needs that are up higher on the pyramid.
Yeah, and then thinking about the us, the relationship entity, trying to satisfy the emotional needs of the relationship in a similar way.
Exactly.
Doesn't work too well for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were talking about, say, buying the house. In some ways, you wanted to have this house because you wanted your relationship with Jay to be this certain type of relationship. Oh, that you were this couple that would have people over, that would have enough guests that you needed a permanent guest room along with an office. I mean, it was a 4-bedroom house, right? Like, I don't even know what you were planning to do with all those bedrooms. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just about you wanted to be that person. You wanted this relationship to be that relationship.
Yes, that's the thing. Because, when I think about when I was on my own, that's not what I wanted. So this, even though I was the one that kind of propelled that decision of getting that large house, it's something that I kind of thought was going to help that relationship. I felt like I needed to do that.
It would showcase that relationship in a certain way, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the esteem level of the needs. So a couple of questions that we think people could kind of ask when they're thinking about money in their relationships. One, do we have no other option than to spend money on this problem? Like, what are the other options to meet this need or solve this problem? And absolutely, it's possible that there is no other mm-hmm. way to solve the problem. Because, as again, we've said this, we recognize this is a money-saturated culture, and getting those basic needs met are a struggle for a lot of people. A lot of people have to spend a lot of their time and effort really just meeting their basic needs. But that's even more of a compelling reason to make sure that what you're doing is meeting a basic need.
So you should be sure, of course, that that is what you're doing, that you're meeting a basic need. Otherwise, the next question would be, what are the emotions involved in this decision? And are you trying to then use money to solve the emotional problem of it? And
again, fair enough. It's not like I never do that. It's not like you never do that, even now, mm-hmm. because it does work in some way. That's what retail therapy is.
Yeah, right.
But it's really not very efficient or effective in the long term.
It's just better to do it consciously. And I've done that, just where the end of a really hard day or the really hard week, it's like, oh man, I really want to go out tonight because it just sounds charging.
Absolutely. I do that too. For the same kind of situation is like, or, sometimes we're on the weekend. I'm feeling a little bored. I mean, mm-hmm. Bored is an emotion. I could figure out a way to do that myself. We're getting increasingly bad, unfortunately, I think, as a culture, figuring out how to address boredom without money, but that's a conversation for another time. But so, we'll sit around. Okay, I'm going to solve the boredom by going out and spend some money, like going out to lunch or going to something that requires money to do so. But asking yourself, as you said, like doing that consciously and intentionally, knowing you're doing that, because what you do not want to do is get emotionally dependent on money. So that if you feel bored, the only way you can address it is spending money. If you feel disconnected, the only way you can address it. If you feel anxious, the only way you can soothe it is money.
To where it's just a default. You're not doing that calculation, really.
No.
It's just like, oh, this is what I do.
It's a dependency.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have, all the other avenues for doing that are degraded. So this is in some ways kind of goes back to the first episode of this season where we talked about the lean startup methodology. It's like, start lean. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the least amount of money I could spend? How does that sound? If it's, I could do it, but I'd prefer to do X, and I have the money to do X, so I'll do X. Fine. Fair enough. But do these calculations and factor the emotions in it. And one more thing, if you consistently need to use money because you don't have other resources, what you need is not more money, is you need other types of resources, meaning probably you need other types of relationships.
Right. If you're finding that money is a need to sustain a relationship, there might be something wrong with that relationship.
If you're finding that money is a need to sustain yourself,
also that.
There's something wrong in the ecosystem. It may be if you have a primary relationship, it may be that. Because relationships fundamentally should be these tremendous resources. And that's what we were talking about with that trailer example. Is it being in a secure, healthy relationship where you find these upper level needs for love and connection and meaning and self-respect. You're not spending money on that anymore.
Right. Yeah. And I think about just the example we just said too. Oh, this was a hard week. I want to go out. But sometimes going out just means going for a walk. And I really enjoy walks with you because it's a time that we connect. If I'm in a relationship where I don't actually want to connect, or I'm afraid to connect, or I just don't feel connected to the person, then the walk isn't going to sound so attractive.
So money is a tool, but I think we're kind of categorizing it more in the potentially negative tools than we are in these positive tools. In that, if you're bringing it out of the toolbox a lot in your relationship, that's suggestive that the relationship is not resourced well.
Well, and that's a way, kind of one of these backdoor ways that it could be a tool. It could be a sign, a signal. Kind of like when we say lying, if I feel the need to lie, then that's something to look at. There may be a problem that needs to be addressed in the relationship or with myself.
Right. So if I feel the need to spend money, there may be a problem with the relationship or with myself or with the other person. Right. There's three entities there. The problem could be in any of them.
So explore that.
I think we could end on a reference to a poem written by Kurt Vonnegut. This reference kind of makes the circles in some financial discussions. It's a little poem where he describes an incident where Kurt Vonnegut, he's an American author, was at a party somewhere fancy. I can't remember, the Hamptons, with Joseph Heller, who's also an American author. He wrote Catch-22. And the way Kurt describes it, he says to Joe, how's it feel to be in this house owned by a person who makes more money in one day than you'll make in your whole lifetime? And Joe said that he had something that these rich people would never have. And Kurt Vonnegut asked him, well, what is that? And Joseph says, I have enough, which is really what we're talking about. The two of us feel like we have enough with just the two of us. Like we had to live in some field in the middle of nowhere. We could still make a happy life because of the resources that we have in our relationship. So the feeling that you have enough is so tremendously enriching and empowering.
So as much as I want that for myself, I want that for everyone, a type of life where the focus is on the satisfaction you can get from the relationship itself. That's really what this season is all about. And the book that we're working on right now is about making that shift, that motivational shift to approach relationships and the feeling and what you can get out of relationships completely differently.
And so we hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks for another discussion.
Thank you.